Governor Kevin Stitt will try for a third time to get a package of tax cuts passed by lawmakers when a special session convenes on October 3rd. His past efforts have failed to gain support with legislative leaders. Will things be different this time around? That's the topic of this week's in-depth conversation with moderator Susan Cadeau.
Rich, Senator Roger Thompson was first elected to the Oklahoma State Senate in 2014. He represents District 8, which is comprised of Okmulgee, Okfuskee, and McIntosh counties, as well as portions of Creek and Muskogee counties. Thompson chairs the Senate Appropriations Committee, dealing with all things budgetary for the state of Oklahoma. Now, we did invite the governor's office and House Republicans to join this discussion. However, they were not available. But right now with me is the man with the plan. You have been chair of the Appropriations Committee for how long, Senator?
For 5 years, going into my 6th year.
You've seen a lot of budgetary issues, and right now we have a special session coming up. Let's jump into kind of explain to folks, what is this special session about?
Well, the governor's called a special session based on 3 points. The first point would be that if there is a lawsuit that is won by a race or a nation, that whatever tax that they do away with, that tax would need to go away. The second point is a reduction in income tax. Third point is for how that we do the budget in the state of Oklahoma. And so happy to discuss any of those 3 points, but the governor's called that for October the 3rd. Of course, as you may be aware, the special session is limited to that call. That's the only thing that we can discuss. It cannot be expanded either by the legislature or by the governor at this time without a new call.
Okay, now Pro Tem Greg Treat has invited the governor to speak to your committee at 10 a.m. right after that special session is called?
Right. So we're going to have a full appropriations meeting. The governor we have on the agenda for 10 o'clock. He has not confirmed whether he will be there or not.
Okay.
Others on the agenda will be our chief fiscal officer for the state senate that will actually give us what are the numbers, how much money we actually have in savings, what are the challenges that we have in the budget. Following that, we'll bring in the treasurer who will look at our receipts over the last, especially the 3 months. And then we'll talk to OMES, who will talk about how many of those receipts goes into the general fund. Then we'll bring the tax commission in, and the tax commission will tell us what is going to be the impact if you do a income tax cut.
So the income tax cut, you talked about a case of race and national affiliation. Let's go back in time for a minute. This is the Strobel v. Oklahoma Tax Commission, which is really born out of the 2020 McGurk decision. And that case states that if you're on tribal land or work for a tribal entity, you don't have to pay state taxes. Is that correct?
Okay, that was the law, that if you lived in trust land and you worked for a tribal entity, you did not have to pay income tax. Whenever the July 2020 McGirt ruling came down, that expanded. What is Indian country? Well, the reservation is still intact. So in the Muskogee Creek, and that's where this citizen is from, and which is my district.
Right.
And now you had 11 counties. And so if you extrapolate that number throughout the state, you could be looking at maybe an income loss of about $120 million to the state of Oklahoma if everyone who we believe is eligible would take that.
This has upset the governor.
It's upset
because the decision hasn't come down yet, right?
No, it has not. And, it's very difficult for us to do litigation, legislation based on litigation, and we're not. The governor wants to have his conversation. However, I think that we need to understand what the full impact of that is. I gave you a figure a few moments ago. It could be as much as $120 million. If we take away the income tax altogether for every citizen in Oklahoma, that's $4 billion. And that's with a B. That's 30% of our overall appropriated budget.
So let's explain that. This goes back to what the governor wants. He has stated that if one person does not have to pay state taxes, nobody does. And that's where we lose that $4 billion if the legislature approves this idea?
That is correct, and I don't see that being approved. I think this is not a good idea to go with. First of all, we are a nation of laws. In July 2020, the Supreme Court of the United States handed down the McGirt ruling that said that the reservations still belong and they still have reservation status. So therefore, we may like it, we may not like it, but it's the law. So how do we work within that framework? Certainly, doing away with all of our income tax, I believe, is a misstep.
Right, because how do we replace that money? I mean, your mind has to, as soon as you hear this, your mind has to start going into high gear.
Well, there's no way. You're going to take money from that income tax. It's appropriated out to our roads. It's appropriated into our hospitals, into our nursing homes. It's appropriated into our schools. And so which one of those do we want to do away with? You just can't take $4 billion out of our budget and then all of a sudden expect services to continue the way they are.
So if the governor has a plan, can you see, having been chair of the Appropriations Committee for 5 years, do you see any way around making this happen? We have to rob Peter to pay Paul, increase the sales tax, or keep the grocery tax in place?
Well, you bring up a lot of good issues there. There's not enough Pauls and Peters out there to rob collectively to offset $4 billion. Right. And whenever we talk about the grocery tax, and the governor talks about that a lot, I think the people of Oklahoma need to realize we've never talked about the total elimination of grocery tax. We've talked about the state's portion of elimination of grocery tax, which is 4.5%. So Okemah, my hometown, has a 10% tax. The residents are still going to pay 5.5% on their groceries. It's not a total elimination. But even that alone has almost a $300 million fiscal impact to the state.
So if income tax is taken away, where could the state raise taxes? Is it only sales tax? Are there other avenues the state could go to get that money from somewhere else?
Well, keep in mind that the people of Oklahoma passed State Question 640 in 1992. That said it takes a 75% supermajority of the legislature to raise taxes, or a simple majority of the people of Oklahoma. And so if we start doing away with our revenue, the question is, where do we get it? And then also, there's no log rolling. You can't just put together a package of bills. They've got to stand individually. And so while it only takes 51% to do away with the tax, it's going to take 75% to put a new one out there. So the question is, where does that money come from? I'd like to hear from the governor to see what he thinks.
Everyone hears no income tax. Woohoo, that sounds great. But it's not great. The reason we think that is because Oklahoma is 5th overall nationwide in citizen tax burden. Is that correct? Is that fact correct?
Yes. Mm-hmm. So whenever we begin to look at how that we are taxed and our overall tax burden, we're about 25th. I mean, we're just about neutral within the state of all 50. But if you look at just our income taxes and our income tax rate, and that's why whenever you're dealing with figures, it's very difficult because people just kind of pick and choose all of them. But let's go to Texas, and that's what the governor compares us to, Texas all the time. And Texas does not have an income tax. And by the way, I just want to say, no state has ever eliminated their income tax. The states without income tax never had one to begin with. And so the idea that we want to eliminate one, there's no one who's been able to do that. But now if you go to Texas, you better be ready to pay property taxes. And if you move to Texas, you're going to pay a little over 6% sales tax on the state portion, whereas here in Oklahoma, it's only 4.5%. Services must continue to move forward.
But don't we have all this surplus money right now? Billions.
Well, we do, and there's no doubt about that. We do not have the $9 billion that the executive branch has said we have. We've got a little over $4 billion. But keep in mind that we've got about $1.2 billion of that in our rainy day fund. And the only way to get to that is bad things happen. Revenue falls, budget comes in less, catastrophe. We have money in our federal medical assistance program, and that's to make sure that we keep even rates out to our nursing homes and hospitals. We do have that money. We've got about $1.4 billion that we have in carryover cash from this last session. But keep in mind that we are an appropriated state of about $12 billion, and we are a $35 billion business in the state of Oklahoma. And so whenever we say, yeah, we might have $4 billion, in my bank account, that's a lot of money, I guarantee you. It's a lot of money, but in the state's bank account, where we're spending hundreds of millions of dollars a day, it can go away in a hurry.
Let's talk about the third part of the governor's proposal is to change the budget process to make it more transparent, to have 3 days during the legislative session where the proposed budget is open to the public. Is that doable, and how is that different from the way things are done right now?
Well, I think it's a great question. First of all, Article 5 of the state constitution tells the legislature to write the budget. And what the governor's trying to do is to tell the legislature how to do their job, and I think it's a violation of Article 5 of the Constitution. Today, our subcommittees meet in public. All those hearings are there. I chair the Appropriation Committee. It's in public. And we have to keep in mind that the budget process is very dynamic. And so as we go through our 4 months of session, there are some numbers that may change during session because the needs of the state changes during session. But it's already an open process as we move forward, as the legislature has deemed it to be.
So what's the talk you were hearing from your colleagues at the state capitol about this?
On just the governor's call?
On the governor's call for special session and on his proposed plan.
Well, on points number 1 and point number 3, I think it's going to be very difficult for us to have a conversation because point number 1 is we can't do away with all of the income tax. Point number 3, Article 5, it's the legislator's job to determine how we write the budget. I think on point number 2, there are some that I've heard that would like to see an income tax reduction. and maybe set us on a path. But keep in mind, if we just simply run through like a 0.75% reduction of our income tax, it's about $770 million a year. And I've not been supportive of that. I'm not supportive of that today. If we look at the needs of the state, and I just want to articulate a couple of those. One is, how are we going to pay for our highways? Today it's done off of our fuel tax. And hybrid cars, electric cars are coming out. Our fuel tax is already going down. Our counties are looking for more money to fix the roads. I think eventually we'll have to use some of our income tax money to offset some of our roads. That's my belief. It's not a belief of anyone else. We look at what came out this last week with the funding of Langston University and the exposure that we have behind that. We have a number of challenges that we have forward in the state. And keep in mind, again, State Question 640, when you do away with this revenue, where are you going to get it back? And so we need to make sure we've got a plan to address those challenges. We've got nursing homes within my district that have closed because they can't hire anybody. We're going to have to look at the wages that we pay our healthcare workers. And we need to make sure they stay open, our hospitals stay open. Those are the needs of the state of the people of Oklahoma. So I often ask, you want to make a point? Or do you want to make a difference? If you want to make a point, that's fine. The governor's call makes a point. If you want to make a difference, we need to make sure we're taking care of the people of Oklahoma.
Let me ask you a question. When it comes down to if Native folks, if the Strobel decision is approved by the state Supreme Court, is that fair to all Oklahomans?
Well, I think that's also a great question. However, we have to understand we're a nation of laws. Whenever the Supreme Court says that the reservation status is still there, then we have to operate within that framework and that law. Now, this is what I believe. Our Native American partners are great partners in the state of Oklahoma. I work well with Chief Hill and the Muskogee District, not only with FEMA, but with the tribe. I don't believe that all natives are going to take advantage of this, because they will also tell you that we're Oklahomans. We're Native Americans, but we're also Oklahomans. They want to do what's right for the state of Oklahoma. I think what they're looking for is a willing partner who will sit down at the table with them and simply have a conversation, and have that in person and not through press releases.
So coming back to the special session coming up again on October 3rd, a couple of weeks away, what do you want to hear from Governor Stitt about his proposal?
Well, it's easy to make a proposal to do away with income tax. I'd like to hear what his plan for the future. Is his plan for the future just simply to cut $4 billion worth of services out of the state of Oklahoma? If it is, I'd like for him to articulate that. If he has a different plan, I'd like to hear it, because I don't see where the money comes from. Our money today is obligated. A lot of it is apportioned out, as we've already talked about. And so if there's a plan, I'd like to have it. I think it's very reckless to say that we want to do away with $4 billion worth of funding for the state of Oklahoma without having a plan to replace it.
Do you see anywhere where taxes might be able to be cut to give some relief to Oklahomans?
Well, yes, I think you can talk about income tax if you like to be able to do that. But it's interesting to me, in my district, and I have some of the poorest counties, I have very few conversations about cutting taxes. I have a lot of conversations about services, about taking care of my mom and dad at the nursing home, about making sure that our schools stay open, making sure that our roads are drivable, making sure that we have police that are on the street to be able to protect us. When I go to the coffee shop, those are the things that I talk about. I hear about business development and making sure our quality of life for our families goes forward. And I have very, very few conversations of people coming up and saying, Roger, I want you to be sure and vote to cut taxes when you get up there because my tax burden is too high. Yeah. Those are very few conversations. And it really, I think, looks good in a political conversation, and we need to have that conversation. But I'm telling you, behind every dollar that we spend in Oklahoma, there's a person. And we need to remember the people of Oklahoma and not just the dollars of Oklahoma.
We're about at the end of our time. I'd like to give you a chance to state anything that I didn't think to ask you about in this conversation that you think the folks statewide need to know about this upcoming special session.
Well, I just encourage everybody to just stay tuned because what happens at 23rd and Lincoln impacts your life in Oklahoma a lot more than what happens in Washington, D.C. And we hear a lot about national news, and sometimes we confuse the two. But we need to pay attention to what's happening at 23rd and Lincoln. If there's some reason we begin to cut taxes, and right now we have money, but we do not use one-time money for ongoing expenses. And whenever you cut a tax, that's an ongoing expense. So we might have savings today, we might be able to pay for it the first year. My question is, what are you going to do the second and third year?
It's so funny, in a personal matter, the more savings you get, the less you want to touch it. Is that true on the state level?
Well, for me, I was here, and when I came in 2014, we had $2.32 in our savings account. I was here in 2018, And whenever the federal government pulled back $110 million and we had to try to come up with a plan, a 75% vote to put money back in the coffer to pay the bills for the state of Oklahoma. I've lived through those times. I am not wanting to leave 23rd and Lincoln in the same shape as I found it when we arrived. We've got legislators there today who are committed to the people of Oklahoma, and I think we need to hold their hands up in battle as we move forward.
And we will end it right there. Senator Roger Thompson, I want to thank you so much for your time. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you. Glad to be here.